Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you.
Tonight's artistic atrocity, The Painting in the Mirror, by Thomas Sirachi. My hands are shaking as I record this. I've long given up any hope of anyone believing me or offering me any form of meaningful help. All I can do is stay in here and hope that I never see it again. I don't know why, but for some reason I've come to believe that if I can't see it, maybe it can't see me. That makes sense, right? You have no idea what I'm talking about. You've probably already dismissed this as the senseless rambling of a madman. But believe whatever you want, I can't help that. All I can do is tell you what I've seen and what horrible things I've come to know about this world. This began about 6 months ago. I was just starting my last semester of college and desperately needed a place to stay. I don't have many people that I can safely call my friends, and this put me at a disadvantage. My home was too far away from campus to commute, and my family couldn't afford to put me up in the overpriced dorms anymore. I was desperate, so I scanned the local newspapers and websites looking for anything that I could afford. Less than a week before classes started, I lucked out. There was a one-room basement studio going for below market value in the nearby town of Greenhaven. The drive to campus would only be about 15 minutes, and there were a number of local stores and restaurants where I could look to find a part-time job. Excited, we contacted the realtor's listed email address, and we got a response inviting us to tour the place, and if we liked it, to sign the lease forms. Things started getting strange the day we got there. When we arrived at the building, rather than meeting the realtor, we were instead greeted by a scrawny courier who handed us an addressed envelope. The keys and the lease forms are inside, he said in an unsteady voice. If you like the place, sign the forms and send them with a check to the address on the envelope. If you don't, just send them back the keys. This struck us as extremely strange, and we tried questioning the courier, but he was rushed and he had more deliveries to make. Once he left, my parents immediately got into an argument. My dad was uneasy and he wanted to leave, convinced that this was some sort of scam or even a trap, but my mom insisted that we look at the apartment. I love my mom, but she's very impulsive and she has an extremely short temper. And before we made a scene, I took the keys and went down into the apartment. It was a small, one-room studio with a cramped bathroom and a kitchenette. It wasn't ideal, but I knew how much my parents were paying for my tuition, and I knew that this was the cheapest place that we were going to find that was actually livable. I faked enthusiasm, which convinced my mother. My dad still looked uneasy, but he didn't argue. The move-in was brutal, and the three of us were exhausted by the end of the night, but the place was cozy enough. I hugged both my parents, thanking them before they left. My dad held on longer than usual, and when Mom was out of earshot, he quietly said to me, "You let me know if anything, and I mean anything, doesn't feel right, okay?" I nodded, and I was about to say something, but when Mom saw him murmuring to me, she became agitated, and my dad decided it was best to leave. But the concerned expression stayed on his face as they drove away. That first night was one of the weirdest of my life. As I lay there on my newly assembled bed, I realized that this was the first time I'd ever slept completely alone. Up until that night, I'd always either lived in my house, a dorm building, or in a hotel room whenever my family went on vacation. In all of these cases, I'd been surrounded by people I knew in a safely guarded place. Now, I was alone, in a creaky old building, in a town I knew nothing about. And then there was the mirror. It was the only decoration in the apartment besides another smaller one in the bathroom, and hung on the wall at the foot of my bed. Whenever I'd shift onto my back, I would be confronted by my own shadowy likeness framed by the bedpost and painting hanging on the wall above me. There's a strange state of consciousness that descends upon the human mind when falling into or emerging from sleep. It's a state of being neither fully asleep nor fully awake, but a murky realm in between where the rational fears of the conscious world are confronted with the macabre imaginings of the irrational unconscious. I had just descended into this state, on the threshold of sleep, when I thought I saw something move in the shadowy depths of the painting's reflection in the mirror. I tried to make out what it was, but my exhaustion caught up to me, and seconds later, I was asleep. Classes began the following day, and I was so distracted that I forgot all about the strange dream. It was nice to see some familiar faces, but I've always had trouble connecting with people on a casual basis, and this semester was no different. I would return from classes and sit in front of my laptop in my tiny, dark apartment with nothing for company except the creaking of pipes and the occasional cockroach scuttling through the kitchenette. At night, I'd lay sleepless in bed, staring at the whitewashed ceiling or my gaunt reflection in the cloudy mirror. It wasn't until about a week later that I saw the figure in the painting again. I'd just come home from a long evening run on Friday night. That was my idea of getting out more, and collapsed exhausted onto my bed, staring into the mirror. Once again, I was just on the brink of sleep when I saw movement in the reflection of the painting. The figure was back, and it was getting closer. I could see that its movements were disjointed, lopsided, as if it had several broken bones, with long gangly limbs like twisted branches. Its ash-colored body was emaciated, hairless, and its head was hung, concealing its face. I remember watching with a sort of horrified fascination as the thing shambled closer, and still closer. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. That seems completely unbelievable to me now, but I don't remember anything else from that night, only that when I awoke, a weak gray morning light was filtering through the apartment's tiny windows, and my throat felt like it was full of sandpaper. I dragged myself out of bed and into the apartment's small bathroom, turned on the faucet to the sink, and greedily slurped metallic-tasting water down my parched throat. Almost immediately, I vomited it back up and drank again at a slower pace to keep myself from throwing up again. When I looked back into the mirror above the sink, I barely recognized the face that stared back at me. My eyes were sunken in their sockets. The flesh between them was swollen with ugly purple blotches, and my skin was pale and pasty looking. I shuffled into the cramped kitchen, my body aching with every move, and opened the fridge. The plate of leftover food from Friday was sludgy and covered in mold, and the half-drunk carton of milk had gone sour. How long had I been asleep? With a creeping dread, I stumbled back to my bedside table and picked up my phone. It had gone dead. I plugged it into the charger, and once it had recharged enough to function, I checked the date. Over a week had gone by. There were several voicemail messages from my mother, growing progressively more worried, the last of which was from the night before. I immediately called her, telling her that I lost my phone and forgotten to call her when I finally found it. "Are you all right?" she asked worriedly. "You don't sound well." "I've come down with something," I said. "Don't worry, I'm fine. I'll sleep it off." After a few minutes, gradually, she calmed down. She offered to drive to where I was staying, but I politely refused on the excuse of not wanting to get her sick. In truth, I didn't want her to see my abysmal state, knowing how prone to hysteria she was with regards to my physical well-being. Although, to be fair, I was fairly close to hysteria myself at the time. The following week was miserable. The workload wasn't too much of a problem, it was still the beginning of the semester, but my physical and psychological condition didn't get any better. Despite the fact that I was malnourished, the very thought of food made me sick, and I ate very little. I slept fitfully, haunted by nightmares of being chased down and rent apart by shapeless monsters. I began visiting the campus health center in my spare time to talk to counselors, at one point bursting into tears in my exhaustion, but when the psychologist recommended that we call my parents, I automatically refused. The last thing I wanted to do was make them worry more about me. At some point in my last session, the subject of the painting came up. I mentioned my recurring nightmare of the misshapen figure from the reflection of the painting over my bed. The psychologist frowned. "Well, what is this painting of?" he asked. "When you're awake, I mean." I realized then that I had no idea what the painting actually depicted when I wasn't having nightmares about it. The psychologist suggested that I take it down immediately and bring it to my next session. When I walked out of the health center, for the first time in weeks, I felt somewhat better. It was so simple, just take the picture down. Why hadn't I thought of that? It also struck me as strange that I had never thought to look at the picture during my waking hours. For the remainder of the day, I felt better than I had since the semester had started. I was actually more focused on my classes than I was my own anxiety and fear, so much so that I'd forgotten all about the painting until I crawled into bed at the end of the day. After undergoing my nightly ritual of tossing and turning in a vain attempt to find a comfortable position, I found myself once again staring into the mirror at the foot of my bed. Naturally, my eyes drifted to the painting suspended over my head, trying to make out what it depicted. I squinted, trying to identify the vague shapes, and then finally realized how stupid I was being. I sat up and twisted around in bed to look at the wall behind me. There was no painting there. I sat, dumbfounded, in that awkward position for a few minutes, staring blankly at that bare wall above my head. I turned back to the mirror, dread gripping my gut like a horrid claw, and saw the painting suspended over my terrified, exhaustion-ravaged face. Back to the wall. Blank, whitewashed plaster. I think this is the point when the last of my sanity left me, because when I turned back to the mirror, the creature's upper body filled the entire picture frame. I watched with a sort of horrified fascination as it stalked even closer, as if, like myself, in a horror film. I willed myself to move, but my body wouldn't respond, as if the nerves connecting my brain to the rest of my body had been severed. I was a sack of meat waiting for the thing in the painting to come and tear me apart. Then the thing dragged itself closer, until its head and shoulders dominated the painting. Two spindly, claw-like hands reached up and clutched the bottom of the frame, and I realized with horror that the claws were gripped around the outside of the frame. Then it lifted its hideous head, covered with sores, and seeping black pus, and it stared straight out of the frame, and I saw its face. Oh my God, I saw its face. Or what was left of it. The skin was cracked and peeling like old paint. The mouth was nothing more than a jagged, bloody line, and its eyes, oh my God. It didn't actually have eyes. Not eyeballs, anyway, just black sockets with rivulets of blood running down its bony cheeks like little black rivers, but it saw me. It saw me. Perhaps it was the trauma of that aberrant sight that broke my paralysis. I scrambled to get out of the bed, but it was too late. The hands lashed out, the clawed fingers sinking themselves into the soft flesh between my neck and shoulders. I tried to scream, but I only managed a choked shriek as I was dragged head first into the painting. I don't entirely remember what happened to me next. Maybe that's for the better, but my memories of the horrible interlude between that dreadful night and whenever it was that I awoke, weak, shivering, and slick with sweat and blood, on the floor of that horrible little apartment to the sound of police kicking down the door. There are only two images that come back to me. One is my immediate descent into the nightmarish world of the painting, my room whooshing away from me and my screams of terror and pain being lost in the roar of some infernal otherworldly wind. The other is the faces. I could see them swirling in the dark, the spectral remains of what perhaps were once people, but were now nothing more than wailing wraiths, churning forever in a vile storm of horror and torment. Whether they saw me or were even capable of sight, I don't know. Perhaps I was just another screaming spirit being dragged through the storm with them, borne upon the hellish winds to whatever damnation awaited me. The doctors here rarely talk to me, and the nurses don't say anything other than empty, vaguely motherly condolences like hush, or don't worry, or everything's gonna be okay. Every now and then I'll feel the sharp pinch of an injection, or the soft rubbing when they change the bandages on my arms and shoulders. How could I not have seen it? How could I have been so stupid? I was there for almost 2 weeks. Or was it 3? 4? I don't know. But in all that time, if I had just contorted in the right position through any of those restless, sleepless nights, or thought to lift my head from my computer screen, I would have seen there was nothing there. And if I'd noticed sooner, maybe I could have gotten help. Maybe I could have gotten out of there sooner and everything would have gone back to normal. Maybe... yeah, maybe. I don't see my parents much. They stop by often to check on me, but I pretend to be asleep. Not because I don't want to see them, but the pain on their faces is too much to bear. I lay there and I feign sleep, despite the fact that they know full well I'm awake. I'm not ready to face the pain yet. I'm not sure I ever will be. I answer the doctor's questions as calmly and accurately as I can. I'm rarely successful. I cry a lot, and I often wake up thrashing and screaming to the creaking of the body restraints holding me to my bed. I'm not allowed near pictures or photos or paintings or mirrors, or rather, they're not allowed near me. And that suits me just fine. Eventually, after what's been probably weeks, but felt like years, I've managed to convince one of the nurses to give me some paper and a pen. She was one of the nice ones. But she gave me a felt marker instead of a pen, and only on the condition that she sit beside me as I write. She's still there now. I like her. She's nice. Actually, quite pretty, though I wish she wouldn't dye her hair black like that. It makes me think of night, which in turn makes me think of nightmares, which makes me think of... Yeah, my hands are shaking again. I should probably stop this. You know my story now. Whether you believe me or not, that's up to you. You probably think I'm crazy, and I probably am. I guess I won't know until I breathe my last breath and I see for myself what lies on the other side of death. Heaven? Hell? Nothing? Personally, I would very much prefer an eternity of nothingness to what I saw in the painting, in the mirror.
So stay scary, wildlings, and make the most of your nights.